As you all know, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction works at the intersection between understanding risk and the risk and impact of risk, and reducing disaster loss and preventing emergence of new risks. We are at the center of an evolving risk, we have learned a lot of things over the past couple of months over how risks are evolving, risks are systemic, and risks are compounding. The coronavirus has definitely taught us a lot about how we can better understand and how can we better work together in order to reduce and address current risks and future risks. It has fundamentally changed our lives within a short period of time, and right now there is no end in sight. The pandemic triggered by the coronavirus is a dynamic event shaped by many different factors. The current situation reveals just our limited understanding and contains systemic and cascading risks posed by pandemics in an age of rapid global flows of people, goods, and information. This pandemic taught us, and it's still continuing to teach us a lot about risk reduction, and resilience. It showed us that everything is interconnected. A biological hazard is not just affecting health of communities, but is negatively impacting a lot of sectors, areas, and governments. The virus gave us an X-ray vision of what vulnerabilities are and how that it is no longer possible for us to focus on one isolated matter at any given point in time. The pandemic also showed us that anybody can be at risk. Being vulnerable is not just reliant on one's income or age or gender, but on a million other things. And that each one is affected differently, depending on already existing levels of vulnerabilities and existing risk governance structures available. It also taught us that strong risk governance is key, and that this is just one of the many hazards that we face. The hazards, the risks, they don't stop, and they don't stop as we respond to a new one and a new one and a new one. They all happen at the same time and has rippling effects to our livelihoods, lives, and to our cultures and the rest. And so putting all this together, so I also have 3 recommendations, just like the earlier speaker, on how we can actually recalibrate, repurpose, and redirect our partnerships in order to help strengthen SIDS in response to and recovery from COVID-19 in the immediate and long term. So my first recommendation is for us to strengthen partnerships that will lead to better risk governance. Low levels of social and capital expenditures and risk-blind investments create inequalities that accentuate risk and vulnerability. Additionally, frequent disasters further deepen social and economic inequalities and disproportionately affecting children, women, and the disabled. This results in a vicious cycle of poverty, inequality, and disaster risk. Better risk governance will help us understand systemic and cascading risks, including how best to prepare for and responding to them. At the rate we're going, I personally believe that post-COVID scenario will not come in the near future. We will continue to face rising risks and compounding risks due to COVID-19 and other hazards, including extreme and slow onset events. These hazards threaten countries with substantial populations located along coastal plains and deltas, and in particular, small island developing states. We need to ensure that scientists, policymakers, and decision makers and communities work together. And we also need to make sure that early warning systems are not just applied in weather forecasts, but also in data from sectors like health. Now, second is for us to forge partnerships that will strengthen our understanding of risks. As we saw over the past couple of months, bringing scientists, policymakers, and communities help us a lot to understand the different factors of how to address and how to respond strategically to the risks that we face. This is coherence in action. It is about bringing together our different strengths, our different sectors, our different lenses in assessing risks and making disaster preparedness and response strategies based on empirical data. With strong understanding of different factors that make communities, governments, and other stakeholders at risk, we can see the entire picture, and we can develop our national DRR strategies and national adaptation plans and other related priorities. It is worth mentioning here that the JNAPs that our colleagues from the Pacific Islands have been doing over the past couple of years, and this is a strong example of how coherence can actually be done and how they can inform planning and other strategies. Climate change has become a major driver and risk amplifier of disaster losses of both human lives and economy. While there is progress in reducing mortality, more and more people are pushed back into poverty by disasters. We really need to break down the silos between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation at country level. Failure to include climate change scenarios and other hazards in the assessment of disaster risks and planning, its reduction creates redundancy of efforts and waste of resources. Last but not least, let us initiate partnerships that will strengthen resilience. Pandemics, typhoons, sea level rise, and other hazards will come our way in the future. They will even come together to test our communities' governance structures and policies. We need to come and work together and make sure we are resilient even before risks come. We can do this by working together and preparing communities to have muscle memory to instantly act based on warnings, unlocking policies or administrative rules so that we can act in anticipatory manner, and looking at various livelihood options given the short, seasonal, and long-term forecasts. These partnerships will enable systemic engagement and action between governments and stakeholders to reduce existing risks and prevent the creation of new risks for resilient socioeconomic development at the global and national level. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction works hand in hand with the other 2030 global agreements and advocates for the substantial reduction of disaster losses in lives and health, economic, physical, social, and environmental assets of communities, peoples, governments, and businesses. It recognizes that state has the primary role to reduce disaster risk, but that responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, including local government, private sector, academia, and scientists. Let us all work together toward risk-centered, coherence-oriented, and resilience-directed partnerships. Thank you very much.